Now, Owen has a much higher IQ than normal. And it's very, very common for high IQ individuals to entertain abstract hypotheses and to entertain alternative ideas simply because they're interesting. And simply because it allows you to imagine other possibilities, because sometimes when you do that, it allows you to understand things in a new and different way. In fact, Aristotle even talks about this specifically in the Rhetoric. He talks about how when we attempt to categorize and synthesize new ideas, that we're able to achieve a different and deeper understanding at times. And so when you ask yourself, why do I believe that we landed on the moon? And you realize that the only reason you landed on the moon is because your school teacher told you that, and then you suddenly realize all the things that your school teacher told you are false. That's when you suddenly back up and go, wait a minute, I don't know that that's actually true. It doesn't matter how smart you are if you don't question your assumptions, then you will cling to bad and false assumptions. Thanks, TK Mao. He says, questioning any historical event is valid, in my opinion. That's absolutely true, because especially if you subscribe to the idea that science is a method to achieve and understand truth, which, by the way, it isn't, but a lot of people believe that it is. If you believe that science is a valid way to discern truth, then you have to understand that all of history is a black book to you. You cannot utilize the method of science to demonstrate any historical event. A historical event is always dependent upon documentary evidence. It's always dependent upon testimonial evidence that has been recorded. And so, now, what Owen's doing is he is dealing with the fact that some of the things that he assumed were true are not actually true. And so he is looking at various other assumptions, and he is realizing that his basis for believing in them is not necessarily any better. And no matter how high your intelligence is, if you don't use it, it's irrelevant. And so, once you realize that you are not thinking about something, because Owen, like me, like a lot of us, never ever stopped to think about whether we had landed on the moon or not. He just assumed we had. It's the same thing with everything from gravity to, I think there's more solid evidence that the Earth is a sphere than the fundamental concept. And so, it's a two-way street. Loyalty works best when it flows both ways. Actually, I have a theory about this. And my theory is based on two things. Number one, I do have a lot of contacts within Google, and it's also very public knowledge. It was, on Breitbart and everything, that I am personally banned from the Mountain View campus. And so my suspicion is that about the last thing that Google wants to do is give me any excuse to file a lawsuit that would allow me to do discovery on all of their internal communication. I think that it is absolutely absurd to imagine or propose that Owen has any issue at all. And I think it's great that he's questioning narratives and he's questioning assumptions, and that he is engaging in this intellectual exploration in such a public and entertaining way. Because those of you who are paying attention to it and who are following it are going to learn all kinds of things about physics and about science that you might otherwise never learn. And so there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to do anything but support what Owen is doing in his exploration of seemingly crazy concepts like nobody landing on the moon, like the flat earth, or anything else. Statics asks, what do you think of Ben Shapiro going after Steve King for suspicions of white nationalism and threatening to support his opponents? I think that Ben Shapiro is a neo-Palestinian firster who is a total fake American, who is a total fake conservative, who is a total fake Republican. I think if you don't understand that Ben Shapiro is a liberal imperialist, he's a neo-Palestinian liberal imperialist, he is a moral and physical coward, and he is being pumped up and inflated well beyond his cognitive capabilities or his ability to communicate justifies. The idea that he is going to successfully replace Michael Savage is ludicrous. I'm not a huge fan of Michael Savage, but he is good at his job. Ben Shapiro is not good at Michael Savage's job, and we're going to see he can no better replace Michael Savage than I could replace Rush Limbaugh. There's this saying that people like, and it says, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I mean, a lot of you have heard that, and a lot of you take it seriously. But just like the moon landing, just like the flat earth, just like all these other things, it requires you to not think about it. Okay? So, first of all, David Hume never said it. The person who actually said it, more or less, is a French mathematician named Pierre-Simon Laplace. He said, the more extraordinary a fact is, the more it needs to be supported by strong evidence. For those who attest to it being able to either deceive or have been deceived, these two causes are all the more probable that the reality of the fact is less so in itself. So what he's trying to do there is he's trying to destroy testimony. He's trying to destroy eyewitness evidence. But remember, he's a mathematician. So he's talking about mathematical proof, which of course science can very, very seldom deliver. And so when we say that extraordinary claim, so here, let me back up. Anyone who repeats this phrase, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, is demonstrating one of two things. The first and the most common one is that they haven't actually thought about it. The second one is that they're not too smart. Because either the evidence is sufficient to establish a fact or it isn't. You don't actually need any more evidence for a claim that you find extraordinary than one that you don't. The same amount of evidence, the same amount of proof is required. So, because the nature of claiming ordinary versus extraordinary is based on what? It's just based on your evidence. I mean, if aliens came down tomorrow and they visited only me, and it was an absolute 100% fact, and I recorded it, and I told you about it. Science would not be able to prove it. You could come up with, I mean, all the stuff they're saying about, well, you could be deceived, or you could be confused, or you could be lying. All of those things are true of the people who are analyzing it. I mean, you look at the discussion of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I told people things that are absolutely true, things that there are plenty of eyewitnesses of, and yet people denied it. They claimed it was false. There's nothing extraordinary about my claims. They just didn't want to believe it. And so this whole extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is just basically a way of saying, if I don't want to believe it, I'm not going to believe it unless and until you remove the possibility, every single possibility of anything else, and I can't move the goalposts anymore. Unless and until you pin me down so that I can't come up with an alternative explanation and I can't reasonably deny it anymore, I'm going to deny it. That's all they're telling you. Because either the evidence is sufficient to prove something is true or it isn't. It doesn't need to be extraordinary evidence. It doesn't need to be strong evidence. Anyhow, it should be clear to everyone that extraordinary claims require no extra proof of their soundness. The only difference between an extraordinary claim and an ordinary one is that there is usually less tangential knowledge surrounding what is described as an extraordinary one. But that tangential knowledge should not be confused with evidence in itself, especially when it does not even support the specific claim being made. So, the whole extraordinary claims idea is nonsense. It's perfectly reasonable to believe things without conclusive evidence. Most of what we believe is believed without conclusive evidence. Whether we're talking about the moon or whether you're talking about whether your mommy loves you. Scientists would find it very, very difficult to prove that your mommy loves you too. I believe that Christians are allowed to be aggressive in defense of themselves and others, and when dealing with wickedness. I think the whole idea that turn the other cheek means that you can never do anything to defend anyone, including yourself, is totally wrong and a total mis-extrapolation of a concept that is more focused on personal pride, not on self-defense, much less matters of war and so forth.